Hello, Bellevue family. Welcome to our virtual Wednesday night lesson this week, where we continue our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Hopefully, in the email that led you to this link, you were also able to get a copy of the handout for tonight, which will cover chapter 8. This is lesson 9. We're going to go through chapter 8. The handout has the questions that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to read a little bit of text, go over the questions as we always do. So hope you've got your handout in your Bible, and we'll get started in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. So I'm going to pick up in verse 1 where the Qoheleth, who is the author, the writer, who I believe to be Solomon, he says this: "Who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed." And the questions that I have there is, what effect can wisdom have on a man? And what does shine mean? Talking about his face shining. What does hardness mean? Talking about the hardness of his face. Well, I think what Solomon is saying is that, wisdom can take someone from having a hard face, which is, I believe, a way of saying someone who is stubborn, someone who is inflexible, someone who wants their way and is going to do whatever they have to do to get their way, and turns them into someone with a much more sunny disposition, a bright face, a shining face, someone who is much easier to get along with. That wisdom will take someone who is hard and turn them into one who is shining, one who is more flexible, one who is softer. Let's go down to verse 2. I'm going to read verses 2 through 8. He says this: "I say, keep the king's command, because of God's oath to him. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. For he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? No man has the power to retain the spirit, or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it." Now, before we talk about the questions, I want to say that I think there are parallels here between these verses 2 through 8, and what we read in Romans chapter 13, especially the first 7 verses of Romans 13, where Paul instructs the church at Rome about being subject to governmental authorities. And here the writer Solomon is talking about being subject to the king. And so I encourage you in your, maybe some time of self-study to go back and read Romans 13, the first part of that chapter, and see the similarities there. But a few questions about this text. I've got a handful of questions that you can find in the handout. First of all, who is the king, and why should one obey the king? And the answer, I believe, that some would say that this is meant to be metaphorical and that the king is God. But I really think that Solomon is talking about, that Solomon is talking about an earthly king, that he's talking about being subject to an earthly king. And that, just like Paul said in Romans chapter 13, that God expects us to be subject to those who are in authority, to governmental authorities, to governing authorities. God expects us to be, subject to those who are in charge. The question I have next is, what happens if one displeases the king? And the idea here is that the king will do whatever the king wants. Look in verse 3. "Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he," meaning the king, "does whatever he pleases." So if we displease the king is going to do whatever the king wants, because the king is in control. The next question is, what can one not say to the king? Coming from verse 4, where the writer Solomon says, "For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing?" And the answer that I have in the handout is, well, no one can question the king, because the king is sovereign. The king is the one in control. How will the wise heart handle service to the king? Well, again, Solomon says that those who are wise in service to the king, that they will work hard to know the proper time and the just way to act before the king. Now, one thing he says is that whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing. Don't take that to mean that nothing bad will ever happen to someone who is following the king or is following the instructions of governing authorities, but instead that we will not be guilty of evil if we are following the instructions of the king. That doesn't mean that something bad is not going to happen to us or that we're not going to be treated unfairly, but that we are not responsible for evil if we are keeping the laws that we're supposed to be keeping, the instructions from the king, the instruction from governing authorities, that we will not be the one responsible for doing evil. Next question, how will the wise heart handle service? Oh, I just did that one, sorry. Next question, how should one handle the difficulties in the unknown nature of life? And, the implication here is that we must live properly and attempt to do just in all situations. And I would add, above this text even, is that we have to put our faith in things that don't change. With difficulties and with the unknown nature of life, as Solomon, as the Qoheleth has said throughout this book, that, we see, the twists and turns of life. And if our faith is is under the sun, as his perspective so often is in this book, if our faith is under the sun, then we're going to be taken with all those twists and turns, with all that uncertainty and all the difficulties. But we have to make sure that we put our faith in something that doesn't change, putting our faith in God. And so he says, instead of doing evil, seek to live properly and to do just in all situations. And then finally, what will not release us from the difficulties of life? And that comes from verse 8, where, doing wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. We're not going to be, discharged from the difficulties of life. He uses war as an example. Wickedness is not going to release us from the challenges and the struggles of life. Again, there's the temptation in the world to say that if we engage in these things that are carnal, that seem like they're going to bring pleasure, that those are the things that are going to help us escape the challenges of life. But the writer says, doing those wicked things, living wickedly in service of the king, is not going to release us from those difficulties in life. All right, let's go down to verse 9. He says, all this about the relationship with the king, all this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. And the question I have is, what had the Qoheleth observed about the rule of men? And what he observed was that man had power over man. So one had power over another, and it says to his hurt. And the second part of my question is, whose hurt is he describing, the ruler or the subject? And honestly, it could be either. I mean, I don't know that we can definitively know, but I believe he's talking about the ruler's hurt. That, because he has talked about this before in this book, that, if you are in power, that, it's easy to abuse that power to your own destruction, to your own hurt. And I believe he's saying the same thing here, that, he observed that there were those who abuse their power in positions of leadership to their own hurt. And as he has said before, we have to be careful if we are in positions of authority that we don't abuse that authority, that we are trustworthy of that position. Let's go to verse 10. He says, then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city when they had done such things. This also is vanity. And I've got the question of, what did he observe about the wicked who had come and gone from the place of holiness? Why is this significant? And here he's seeing almost a contradiction, because he's describing these individuals that were buried as being wicked, yet their activities maybe would have indicated that they were holy. He says they went in and out of holy place. They were praised in the city where they had done these things. So on the appearance, they appeared to be holy, yet he describes them as wicked. But yet, even though they were wicked, they received a burial. And receiving a proper burial was a big deal in Old Testament culture. It was an honor to receive a proper burial. And here he's saying Well, I saw it's almost like this is injustice. I saw the wicked receiving this proper burial. You know, they went through the motions of religion, but they were wicked, but they still received this proper burial. They received this sign of honor. And he's talking about how, you know, things don't add up in this life. You know, we're going to see a lot of that in the next couple of chapters about how things just don't seem to add up in life. Things that don't work out the way we think that they should. And sometimes, you know, we see honor being given to those who are wicked and honor not being given to those who are honorable, who are trustworthy, who are attempting to live a holy life before God. Verse 11, he says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. And I've got the question, well, why were the hearts of some men set to do evil? And it's because justice is not immediate. You know, I've said this a lot going through this book because it's, you know, a lot has been said about justice and oppression and injustice and those kinds of things. And I think instinctually as humans, we want justice. We want things to be just. We want things to be fair. We want things to be set right. You know, when something happens against us that angers us, we want all of that to be put right. We want justice. And it just doesn't always work out that way. And we can then take it upon ourselves to say, well, I'm going to do what I can to bring about justice, to get revenge, to get vengeance on the person who has wronged me. You know, we set our hearts, we set our mind on things that are evil because we want revenge, we want justice when we don't see justice being carried out immediately. Go down to verses 12 and 13. He says, though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. And I love this because here, Solomon, the Koheleth, is kind of peeking up above the sun again. He's talking about relationship to God. So you see, you know, he says there's almost a contrast here of what we perceive to be happening and what's really happening. And the question I have is, what did the Koheleth conclude about a sinner whose days are prolonged? And he says, you know, we may see a sinner whose days are prolonged in his life, that it seems like, you know, it's someone who's wicked, someone who's a sinner, and it seems like, you know, he has all the advantages. It seems like all the things are going his way. His life is prolonged. And we may think, you know, looking at that, saying, well, then that's the way we ought to live. That's the way we ought to be. But he says, no, that's not the real way. The true thing, he says, it will not be well with the wicked. Neither will he prolong his days like a shadow. And back in verse 12, he says, I know that it will be well with those who fear God because they fear before him. And when he talks about the wicked again in verse 13, he says, I know that they're not going to prolong their days because he does not fear before God. And so we have to remember that it's not just about this life. Our citizenship is beyond this life. And truly, the ones who fear God are the ones who are going to prolong their lives because of the gift we have been given by God. It's not the ones who may seem to have all the advantages in this life because life doesn't add up. Life doesn't fit into an equation. And we look at those who have had good things happen to them, even though they're not living in service to God, in fear of God. And we say, well, maybe that's the way we should be. But instead, he says, no, you're really going to prolong your life if you fear God, if you respect God, if you reverence him, if you live for him. That's the true way to prolong your life. Don't be fooled by the inequities that we see in this life and think that we can figure it out. We have to serve God. And this is how he's going to conclude the whole book, as we've talked about before. When he gets to the very end in chapter 12, he's going to say, you know, the conclusion to the whole matter, the end of it is all, fear God and keep his commandments. That is the whole duty of man. Go down to verse 14. He says, there is a vanity that takes place on earth, and there are righteous people to whom happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said, this also is vanity. Now, he's back under the sun again. And he's talking about his observations in the world under the sun. And the question I have is, what does the Qoheleth again describe as vanity that occurs on this earth? And the answer that I have in the handout is things appear to happen in the opposite way of what is deserved. He says to the wicked, the wicked, what happens to them is what we think what should happen to the righteous. And what happens to the righteous is what we think should happen to those who are wicked. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Life doesn't add up. Life doesn't fit into an equation. And so, we look at that and we think, how can I get through that? How can I deal with that? And if we're putting our faith in the things of this life, we're going to be frustrated by this inequity. We're going to be frustrated by that vanity because nothing, things in life are not fair. Things in life are not equitable. They don't happen to the way we think they should. And so the message of all of this entire book and of these verses specifically is that, we can be released from having to think that all of this stuff has to work out in this life for us to be happy. Things have to work out according to the way we think they should, that we receive the rewards that we think we should receive, that all that has to happen in order for us to be happy. But instead, we know that we have to look beyond this life to put the weight of our life, to put our faith in something that doesn't change, in God and His plan, that does not change, that is not unfair, that is not unjust, that is not subject to all of the twists and turns of life. Because as the writer continues to observe, things in life are just not fair. They don't work out the way we think they should. Go down to verse 15. He says, "And I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful. For this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun." And this is a very consistent theme in this book. If you've got the handout, I have referenced, 6 other passages in Ecclesiastes that say something similar to this, that, God has given us the ability to enjoy our lives. Even though, if we say we're just focused under the sun, things may appear to be vanity, meaningless, but God has given us the ability to enjoy those things. And if you go back to chapter 2, in verse 24, he said this, "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God." In the very next verse, I don't have this in the handout, but the very next verse after that says that the ones who are able to find enjoyment are the ones who are striving to please God. The key is to finding enjoyment in our toil is that we are seeking to please God rather than seeking to please ourselves. If we seek to please ourselves, then we're going to be subject to the futility and the vanity and the frustration of this life. But if instead we are seeking to please God, then our hope is in God, our confidence is in God, then God gives us the ability to enjoy wherever we are, to enjoy our life, to enjoy our toil. And as Solomon says, that joy will go with us in our toil, in our work, because God has given us the ability to enjoy the things that we do. Go down to verses 16 and 17 to close us out. He says, "When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out." And the question that I have there is, what did the Qoheleth conclude after diligently observing the business that is done on the earth? And the conclusion was that no matter the human effort, no matter how much energy and effort we expend, we cannot fathom the workings of God. If we are looking under the sun and we're trying to figure out how everything fits together, how everything is working, we're not going to be able to figure out how God works. We're not going to be able to make sense of it. So that's why instead of focusing on this life and trying to figure out all the things that are happening, we have to focus on God and let go of trying to figure out everything in life. We have to look to God. And it reminded me so much of what Paul said in Romans chapter 11. this great doxology, praise to God, where he says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways." We can't know what's happening. We can't fully figure out the nature and the ways of God. God has revealed the things that we need to know, the things that we need to know to receive Christ, the things that we need to know to respond to him, to put faith in him, to live a life in service to him. But if we look under the sun and we see all these things happening and we try to figure out, the mysteries and the workings of God, we're never going to be able to figure those things out. And so, as with all of this book, the message for us is that, we have a choice, again, of where we're going to put the weight of our lives, where we're going to put our faith. We can put it in ourselves, and ultimately that means put it in this life, as Solomon describes over and over again, put it under the sun, where our life is going to be subject to the vanity and the futility and the frustration of life, because life is not fair, life is not just, life is uncertain. And so if we put our faith there, we're going to be subject to that futility. We're going to be disappointed, and we're going to have no hope, because there is no hope beyond this life. But our other option is to put our faith above the sun, to put our faith in God and his plan, in something that does not change, in something that is not changed by the injustices of this life, by the unfairness of this life. We put our faith in God because we believe that he is the only way to prolong our days, to have eternal life, to live beyond this life under the sun. And so I hope you'll take that message with you from this chapter, from the whole book for this week. Thanks for carving out a few minutes tonight to go through this lesson on Ecclesiastes chapter 8. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you have a fantastic remainder of the week, and look forward to being together with all of you soon.